Okay. I was just saying to the cabinet before you came in that it's my first time that we've been together since the election, and we were talking a little bit about the election season and the way people feel during the election season, and the amount of cynicism that was out there, and that at the end of the day, what I believe broke through was the performance and the leadership of the people around this table. No matter how unhappy a constituent was, the one thing they never argued about was that this is a government that has performed and has performed in no government like no government they've ever seen. And that is actually a factually true statement. So we started with those pins that said performance, integrity, and pride. And those three words, as simple as they are, actually guided this administration and guided it well. So the good news is we have 4 more years to keep doing the good work that we've been doing and that we enjoy doing, and that this state certainly deserves. We have some first-timers around the table who have been with the administration, some of whom have been with the administration a while, but just because we haven't had a meeting, maybe everyone hasn't had a chance to meet them. I think Commissioner Richard Ball, is this your first cabinet meeting?
It is.
Well, welcome. You should know at your first cabinet meeting, it's customary for you to buy drinks that night. We have Maggie Miller, who's the Chief Information Officer. Congratulations, Maggie. We have Kara Allen, who's the Deputy Secretary for Energy. Kara, why don't you stand up? We have Rachel Holt, who is the Deputy Secretary for Technology. She dropped right out of cyberspace onto our lap, and she has been a godsend. We have a really exciting new website, and it was a beast of an undertaking because you had to coordinate with all the different agencies, and Rachel's done a fantastic job there. And Terry O'Leary, Deputy Secretary for Public Safety. Terry's done a magnificent job. We said goodbye to a really great friend and a really great public servant who was an integral member of this team, and that's our Lieutenant Governor Bob Duffy. And we had a number of farewells to the point where he said, enough already, I get it, I get it. But he, in so many ways, was just on a personal level, integral to everything that we've been about. And a better friend, a better colleague you couldn't have than Bob Duffy. In 4 years, the man never said no. And you know, I can come up with some crazy asks. The man never said no. So we are going to sorely miss him. The good news is we're very excited about the Lieutenant Governor-elect, who is here in her unofficial capacity. She'll become official after January 1. But she is going to be different than Bob, differences, starting from a very fundamental level. From Western New York, she served in the Congress, which means she knows Congress, she knows the federal government. That is a very big asset for us. How we do with the federal government is very important to any state administration, especially this state administration. We have major issues going on with the federal government, FEMA reforms, Medicaid, cost questioning. So she's going to be able to help on that level. And plus, she is the first female Democratic lieutenant governor in something like 35 years. So she just brings a perspective to government that we haven't had at a very high level. So we're very excited about her. Let's give her a warm welcome, Kathy Holcomb. Now, Kathy, I didn't give her a full explanation of the job before she started because I was afraid if I gave her the full range of what we do. she might not come, frankly. So a little seduction in the beginning by saying less rather than more. But part of what we do here, Kathy, is we are also tour guide leaders for the state of New York, which is a new role that we sort of have adapted. And you need different types of equipment for different activities. And this is going to be the first piece of equipment you need. Now, do you know what this very handsome piece of equipment is for?
I can't wait to hear about this one.
Yeah. This is a snowmobile helmet with special air breathing control for under -20. Actually, this helmet is ready. So this is going to be the first piece of equipment you need. Our first tour guide activity is going to be Tug Hill. Where's Joe Martens? Right here, sir. Tug Hill, snowmobiling. One of the best places to snowmobile, not only in the state of New York, but arguably in the entire Northeast. We went last year. We had a ball. So Tug Hill first, and then we're going to try to get to the Adirondacks later in the season. Joe Martens, expert snowmobiler and guide. So Tug Hill, do we have a tentative date for Tug Hill?
Not yet, Governor. So if it's snow permitting, we're keeping our eye on it.
A little bit on the chilly side, Tug Hill.
I know when you get you some snow.
Yeah. Now, if we were thinking ahead, we would have had a place to send all those trucks from Buffalo. Well, let's give Kathy another warm welcome. Let me raise a couple of points, and then we have a number of presentations. Larry's going to talk about the state of the state. Jim is going to talk about year-end. Bob Megner is going to give us an update on the budget. Obviously, they're all coming due. State of the state is right around the corner. You celebrate the holidays, and then the state of the state. The budget is right after that. So the pieces fall very quickly, so we try to get everything prepared. We'll then have an update on fracking. First, I want to speak a little bit to the possibility of special session and what the legislators are feeling and what we are trying to communicate. The basic play is that the legislators want and feel that they deserve a pay increase. And you can make a very strong case that they are overdue for a pay increase. It's been about 16 years since the legislature got an increase in pay. Proportionately, relatively, New York is one of the higher paid legislatures, but New York is also one of the higher cost states. So the legislature wants a pay increase. I could justify a pay increase if it was coupled with a package of real reform. And I said to the legislature I would feel comfortable going to the people of the state and saying I support a pay raise because we're going to have real reform. The two are connected to me because part of what has been going on over the past couple of years is people want to know they have a government that they can trust and a government that is working for them. The issue of salary goes right to that. First request I made in the discussions was for public finance reform. Public finance reform is basically considered a non-starter by members of the legislature. It is something you should know I have asked for probably over the past 4 years, and we've debated this over the past 4 years, and the legislature has always refused to do it. They refused to do it before I set up the Moreland Commission. They refused to do it in closing down the Moreland Commission. They consistently refused to do it. The Senate feels that they ran against public finance in this last election cycle and that they were successful. So their feelings are public finance has been rejected by the people of the state and public finance is a non-starter. I understand how the Senate feels. And by the way, Senator Skelos is accurate. We have had the conversation multiple times. That was just about the decibel level that he used when he explained his unhappiness with me. My fallback position on public finance was, how about a public finance referendum? We'll put it to the people. And if the people vote it down, the people vote it down. The Senate's basic position is, we just did that. It was called an election. And it was one of the main issues they ran on, so there's no reason to do a referendum. And again, that is something I had proposed multiple times before. The fallback to that, I said, then how about campaign finance reform? If we can't get to yes on public finance, how about campaign finance reform? And we reduce the limits. We reduce the LLC, what they call the LLC, close the LLC loophole. We clean up the housekeeping and reduce the high limits across the board. There are members of the legislature who are against that because they feel with now the new independent expenditure committees that basically dominate politics now, that campaign finance reform would be a one-sided operation where you're really putting the political parties at a disadvantage, and these independent expenditure committees, so-called IEs, would dominate the political landscape, which would not be good either. These independent expenditure committees, to me, are the most dangerous aspect for quality elections in this country. The independent expenditure committees allow unlimited spending by corporations and individuals. They have to theoretically be independent from the campaign of the candidate, but it's unlimited spending. And very little recourse, and very little that we can do about it because this is federal law, not state law. So I believe if we could limit independent expenditure committees, they would agree to campaign finance reform. But we can't. Campaign finance reform then becomes a non-starter. I even put on the table a proposal that basically said, let's do more disclosure. Let's limit income, outside income, and let's have prohibited sources. I think if you could say to the people of the state, the outside income can only be earned from a source that has nothing to do with the state of New York in any manner, shape, or form. There is no possible conflict because the income comes from a totally unrelated source, has nothing to do with being a legislator. And that income is limited. And that income is fully disclosed. And you clean up housekeeping, personal use, et cetera. I think you could make that argument to the people of the state of New York. But the legislature's point is, we've been doing ethics reform every few months for 4 years, which is true. We set up J-COPE, we came up with more disclosure, more ethics, and their basic feeling is it will never be enough, and the answer will always be to do more, so it's an endless game. So when the legislature says that they don't think I've been serious in negotiations, they mean more the expression, you can't be serious, right? And I understand their point of view. I have been asking for these things, and they have been saying no for 4 years. And their point is, why would we say yes now? My point is, because you want a pay raise. And if you really, really want a pay raise, maybe you'll say yes, where you wouldn't have said no before. We have had very little progress or success thus far. I believe that both Senator Skelos and Speaker Silver are operating in good faith. This has been an ongoing conversation for 4 years. Their feelings about independent expenditure committees are valid. And their feelings about we've done reform and they've said no and drawn limits before, and I'm going back and treading on old ground is also true. My feeling is they can't be serious if they think I'm going to support a pay raise without reform. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go to the people of the state of New York and say, I think we should raise the legislature's pay, but the legislature refuses any additional reforms. The legislature refuses more disclosure, more limits, public finance, campaign finance. There won't be any significant reforms. That is a non-starter for me, as my positions are a non-starter for them. I've tried to be flexible. I remain flexible, but time is short. But that is the back and forth on that conversation. And again, everyone is operating in good faith and is sincere. I have a very good relationship with both houses on a personal level and a professional level. That doesn't mean you're always going to agree. And this is one of those issues where they really represent the members. This is an issue that is of particular relevance to the members as members, right? This is not just the members as representatives of the people of the state of New York. This is the members representing the members. This is the members' pay. And I understand that. I'm representing the members' interest, but also the people of the state of New York. And if we could come up with a real reform package, I would go to the people and say, I think I could justify a pay raise, especially if it was something that really restored confidence and trust in the system. That would really be worth it on a number of levels. So that is what we are talking through. Conversations are continuing, but again, significant progress has not been made. This afternoon, we will hear the decisions by the Gaming Siting Selection Board, or something like that. What is it called exactly? Gaming Facility Location Board. GFLB, as it's known by its friends. This has worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. They have done an extraordinary job. These are experts. They've had hearings around the state. They've researched these proposals, and they are going to announce their findings this afternoon at 2 o'clock. This was a very stiff competition. It was a competition, frankly, that when we did the legislation, we basically said, leave it to the board. I don't want the legislature involved in it. I don't want the executive involved in it. Let them make their selections. They'll announce their selections this afternoon. Those selections will technically go to the full gaming board for review. That review is basically administrative. And that review will do a further background check, further financial review, but it is highly unlikely that the gaming board reverses anything that the siting board found. So the siting decisions will be all but final. It's hard to imagine a scenario where the gaming board would actually change the determination of the siting facility. I suppose they could eliminate a proposal if they found fraud or if they found some significant issue. But that's highly, highly unlikely. Would you say that's accurate, Rob? Yeah, that's accurate. Okay, so that'll be this afternoon. That's going to be big news. I watched the local news last night, and they were going through the gaming proposals, which have generated a lot of interest and excitement, which is a good thing. The way they discuss it on the news, I think it's important to remember, the state has no money on the table on any of these scenarios. You know, they go through the scenario, this scenario is 380 million, this one is 400 million. The state is not putting in a penny. We don't have any money on the table. It is only upside for the state. So when people say, well, there's a lot of casinos now, maybe there's a lot of competition, how do you know how well a casino is going to do? We don't. But by the way, we're not building the casinos, and we're not operating the casinos, and we're not putting our money into the casinos. We have opened the competition. These are all big boys and big ladies, and this is what they do. They operate casinos, and they are betting their money that they can make this kind of investment, and the casino is going to be a success. And these are highly sophisticated players, and they know what they're doing, and they will work, plus or minus, but the risk is all on the private sector. And we have only upside in it. Construction jobs, operating jobs, sharing revenue. And as we discussed at the very beginning of this process, people who want to enjoy gaming, they will go somewhere. They'll go to Massachusetts, they'll go to New Jersey, they'll go somewhere. And our point was, let's keep them and keep those dollars in the state of New York in a full resort environment that generates jobs. So it's going to be exciting because it will accomplish that task, especially upstate New York. Remember, we did no gaming facilities in New York City. Why? Because we want to use the upstate casinos as a magnet to draw people from New York City upstate. A big part of what this has been about, everything we've done for the past 4 years and will continue over the next 4, is correcting for the abandonment that upstate New York received. If you look at the way upstate New York was treated compared to downstate New York, upstate New York got the short end of the stick. And what we've been doing, upstate revitalization efforts, casinos in upstate, we're trying to drive the upstate economy. Why? 2 reasons. First, we love upstate New York. Second, we're one balance sheet anyway. New York City is not a separate set of books. We're one statewide balance sheet. If upstate New York is not doing well, it's a problem for downstate New York. So the best strategy is strength overall. With that, let's turn it over to Mr. Jim Malatras, who's going to talk about a year-end review.
Thank you, Governor. Just want to present a very brief 450-slide look back. Nearly 4 years ago, we were here at the Red Room as we started our work to build a new New York. We knew it was not going to be an easy task, but working together, we rose to the challenge and delivered a record of significant and almost unthinkable accomplishment. We started by making the government work 4 on-time budgets in a row for the first time in more than 40 years. But it comes at a cost. And we practiced a true fiscal discipline, holding state spending below 2% for 4 consecutive years, and Bob paid a terrible, terrible price. He lost his hair color. Recognizing that New York has no future as the tax capital, we enacted a property tax cap, and that tax cap is working. And we lowered taxes to the lowest rate in generations. The lowest middle-class tax rate since 1953, the manufacturing tax rate since 1978, the corporate tax rate since 1968. Our programs are working. We reestablished New York as the progressive capital of the nation, passing marriage equality, sensible gun safety laws, and raising the minimum wage. We created the RDCs to empower each region of the state to chart their own economic destiny. We made New York State the least expensive place in the nation to do business through Startup New York. From our focus on tourism, support for the beverage industry, to targeted investments in job-creating projects, we helped turn the upstate economy around. And it worked. Interestingly, we noticed our highest attendance was among members of the media at the Beer, Wine, and Spirits Summit. And I think Bill Hammond needs to admit that that's not a glass of Diet Coke, that's actually something stronger. But for some, that just means more coffee. After decades of negative economic outlook, we turned the tide in Buffalo. Our education reforms and investments put students first and included the highest level of school aid in the history of New York State, a teacher evaluation system, and universal statewide pre-K. We've even started training our future directors of budget and state operations. That's really the power behind us, quite frankly. After decades of talk and inaction, we are finally building a bridge to replace the Tappan Zee, on time and on budget. After years of discord, we reached landmark agreements regarding casino revenue. We've reached major labor agreements that save taxpayer dollars and averted strikes and major layoffs. In storm season, when Mother Nature reared her ugly head, government delivered. Speaking of seasons, New Yorkers experience the 4 seasons every year: winter, spring, summer, fall. But here in the chamber, we have a different set of seasons. We call them the seasons of Larry. State of the state, Larry starts off generally happy, go lucky, happy to see all of us. By budget time, he's less happy. That is true, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a real post-budget picture. By the end of the session, we don't know what's happened to Larry. And then by summer break, he's happy again. I'm going to pay for that slide, I know.
Yes, you are.
We rose to meet new challenges posed by public health threats like Ebola and terrorism. There was even time for international travel to show our unity with Israel and to visit troops serving in Afghanistan. But these are tough jobs. It's no surprise that after 4 years, some of us have aged. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Joe Percoco in 2010. He looked young, vibrant, energetic. Let's look at Joe Percoco today in 2014. There's nothing really to say. The picture speaks for itself. I'm going to pay for that slide, too. The results of our efforts speak for themselves. The most private sector jobs in the history of the state. Unemployment is down in every region of the state. Our credit ratings are up, and we're making much progress. But this much has to do with the commissioners. It has to do with you. New York is cleaner and greener because of you. New York is healthier because of you. And New Yorker is safer because of you. New York showed that government can work together and deliver for the people of the state. So, Governor, thank you for your leadership. And on behalf of the Governor, I want to thank all of our commissioners and all of our staff on the Cabinet for all of their extraordinary work. Happy New Year and happy holidays.
Very nice. We're going to, Larry Schwartz is going to talk about the state of the state. The state of the state for the newcomers. When I was running the Department of Housing and Urban Development on the federal side, the president did the State of the Union, which is basically a mirror of the state of the state. But it was imperative to get our agency in the State of the Union. Why? Because that is the governor's priorities, the president's priorities for that year. So if you have a creative idea, you have an innovation, you have a reform, you want it highlighted, you want your agenda publicized, you want your department energized, you want to be in the state of the state. So I would come with my best idea, my best program, and be all over Happy Larry and the team trying to get my idea in the state of the state. Caveat is it has to be a great idea, because that is the repository of great ideas. And it can't be something warmed over. And the competition is very high because we're going to have a very ambitious state of the state. But we're also coming down to it in terms of program, and we're starting to really cut and paste now. So if you have something, now is the time to bring it. If you don't have anything, I would suggest you go back to your department and you rattle the cage until you come up with some ideas that you can put on the table. Mr. Schwartz?
Well, Governor, I think you clearly put it out there. First, just as a point of personal preference, I have never looked that tan since January 1st of 2011. I've been vitamin D deficient for the last 4 years.
Well, that wasn't your bar mitzvah picture,
Right,
so
right.
somewhere around there.
As the governor has said, in terms of the state of the state, first, over the last 4 years, I want to thank a lot of the cabinet members for a lot of good ideas that you have given us that have been included in the governor's state of the state addresses over the last 4 years. And we've received a number of interesting ideas from you. I would just emphasize that January 7th is the day the governor gives the state of the state address. So if you haven't come up with any ideas, or you're still thinking of good ideas, you have until before Christmas to get them in to me so that I can go through them with Jim and other members of the governor's team, so we can vet them and make decisions what to propose to the governor. And I think I just want to emphasize again what the governor said is you really need, I know it's an overused expression, think outside the box, use it whatever thoughts you want. You need to be bold, you need to be big, you need to be creative. Don't worry about the fiscal component, don't worry about other issues. We'll vet them out. Let us figure out, do not hold back anything. If you think it's a great idea, make your case, present it to us, we'll take it from there. So get it into me by December 23rd. That's sort of the deadline for the January 7th State of State.
Thank you. Budget, again for our newcomers, and just to annoy the veterans. Budget is one of those processes that I find infuriating. There's a long list of processes I find infuriating, but budget is right up there at the top. It has nothing to do with Bob Magna, who's always a pleasure to deal with. It takes the worst of the bureaucratic mentality and institutionalizes it. What is our budget for next year? Well, what was our budget for last year? Our budget for last year was $32 million. Well, then our budget is $32 million plus some inflator factor or whatever DOB allows us to increase. No. $32 million did not come from God. There is no wisdom to $32 million. $32 million says if we did everything exactly the same, it would be $32 million. And $32 million is how the agency has evolved. And really, you have to use it as an opportunity to say, I want to know what's under that $32 million. And the question is, why? You ask that question, why, enough, there will be no answer. I'll make you a personal bet on any of your agencies. Let me come to a staff meeting with your team. See, the bureaucracy says, if we did it before, it is now in gospel. And we must do what we did, and that is a bona fide basis for continuation. No. You scratch the surface, half the time there's no reason for doing what they did. We have 52 people doing compliance in Buffalo. Why? Well, we always had 52 people doing compliance in Buffalo. Why? I had a discussion at HUD once, which was this constant provocation. We looked at the staffing all across the country. We have a very high staffing ratio in Arizona, very high staffing ratio in Florida, and disproportionate to the workload. I said, I don't understand why we have so many people in Arizona, why we have so many people in Florida. First answer was that's where the caseload is, and they do a caseload run. That's not true. Second answer is that's where we think future business is going to grow. That's not true. Answer, you know why we had more people in Arizona and Florida? Because they were retiring, and they wanted to go to Florida, and they wanted to go to Arizona. So from the west, they were moving down to Arizona. From the east, they were moving to Florida, and they wanted to do their high 3 down in Florida and Arizona and have the government pay the moving cost. I understand how the bureaucracy operates, but you have to question every one of these things. And it's a great opportunity to make them go through why you do what you do. And it's an annual opportunity to say, what's our mission? What's our priority? And why are we doing this? Well, if we don't do it, the union will be mad. So what? You don't work for the union. You work for the people. Well, if we change this, Assemblyman Kitsapotzen is going to be mad. So what? Right? You were there for a function and to provide a function in a cost-effective way. And you are the only voice that will do this. Because everybody else looks at you in the room like you have 3 heads. Because their attitude is the bureaucracy perpetuates the bureaucracy. And it protects the bureaucracy. And the budget process is one of the few times that you can get at this. I've had this conversation with Bob. On the federal side, it's actually better. Because federal DOB does it for you. Federal DOB says a commissioner can never do it. Because the commissioner will wind up losing to the commissioner's bureaucracy. Or the commissioner will be too nervous to make the changes and have bad relations. So federal DOB assumes the commissioner fails, and federal DOB runs your budget. You just get a budget from federal DOB, has nothing to do with the budget you put in. And you call up and they basically say, tough noogies. That's your budget. So I don't know where the truth is. The better way to do it is you do it, because you know it better. But that's what the budget process is all about. DOB is a discipline, but it's as an overall cap discipline. And also, look, it fits into the state of the state. You have X number of employees. I talked to a few of you about this. You now have 100 employees doing something. Well, I wanted to do something else. Fine. Stop doing something that you're doing and move those employees. You know, the answer can't always be additive. I want to keep doing everything I'm doing because I don't want to upset anybody, and if I ask them to move their desk, I'm going to have a problem. So let me add on top. No. Manage the organization. If you don't want to be the bad guy, let Bob be the bad guy. Bob doesn't want to be the bad guy, let Jim be the bad guy. If Jim doesn't want to be the bad guy, Larry will be the bad guy. And if Larry doesn't want to be the bad guy, I'll be the bad guy. But it really is an opportunity to reshape. And if you just, you know, let it go by and rubber stamp it, I think you really lose an opportunity, because that shapes the organization. With that, Mr. Bad Guy, nobody thinks Bob is a bad guy.
Governor, this was great, because I could not have done that better, and I'll be sending everyone's budgets out this afternoon. And I don't know what Larry was talking about no fiscal restraint on state-of-the-state ideas. But, no, you know, the governor did say, you know, most of what I would hit on. The state is in incredibly good financial shape right now. That's been reflected not just by what we say, but what outside observers say. You know, all three credit rating agencies, as Jim pointed out, have us at the highest level we've been since the early 70s, and in some cases the highest we've ever been. And that's because of the fiscal discipline that we've achieved, largely because you've achieved working with us at DOB on your budgets. We're continuing to ask you to do that. We're working with you to keep your budgets flat. We sent out a call letter, and our staffs have been working with your staffs, and we thank you for that cooperation. We know it will continue, and we're trying to do the things that the governor pointed out exactly. We're asking you to do the stuff your core mission, and getting rid of the things that are not your core mission, so that we can continue the fiscal improvements we've made over the past 4 years and continue them into the future. Our financial situation end of year is going to be very good. And that's even not considering any settlement payments that we've had. If you just look at our core budget, it's in excellent, excellent shape right now. And that's because of all of the things we've been able to do together over the past 4 years and hopefully into the future. So the governor said it all. I'll just end by saying that it's an election year, and so the budget should have come out this year on February 1st, but that's a Sunday. So we're going to plan for January 27th, which is the Tuesday, so we'll be earlier than we need to be. But we think we can accommodate that and get everything we need to get done by that date. Thank you, Governor.
Thanks, Bob. Last issue is fracking. For those of you, this is an issue that involves everyone because you will all be asked about fracking. I've been asked about fracking about 14,600 times, again at various decibel levels. My position on fracking has been this. The dialogue on fracking is an emotional dialogue. There's a pro and a con. Both are highly emotional. For the past few years, I've been talking to protesters all around the state. You talk to the anti-frackers, 30 seconds, and they're yelling. And they're passionate, and they're emotional, and they're angry, and they're scared, and a mix of all of the above. And they're not listening, and they're not hearing, and they're yelling. You speak to the pro-frackers, same thing. This has been probably the most emotion-charged issue that I've ever experienced. More emotion-charged than marriage equality, more emotion-charged than the gun issue, more emotion-charged than the death penalty. It's amazing. My position is very simple. This is a highly technical question. This is not really a layman's question. Is fracking safe? Is it dangerous? Should it be allowed to go forward, right? The pro is it can create jobs. The negative is it's dangerous. And depending on which side of the table you're on, that's the argument. Obviously, everybody's in favor of creating jobs. Obviously, everyone is against creating a dangerous public health or environmental situation. So the question becomes, what is it? Is it a great job generator? Or is it a danger to public health or the environment? And my answer has been, I don't know. And it's not what I do. I am not a scientist. I'm not an environmental expert. I'm not a health expert. I'm a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not a scientist. So let's bring the emotion down and let's ask the qualified experts what their opinion is. And I've said, all things being equal, I will be bound by what the experts say, because I am not in a position to second-guess them with my expertise. The people around this table have discrete areas of expertise. State police issue, I asked the superintendent of state police. That's what he knows. And fracking is much the same. It is a highly technical field that needs more information and less emotion, and ask the experts. That's what we did. Procedurally, DEC Commissioner Martens has been preparing the environmental review document, the SGEIS. One of the questions or areas in the SGEIS is what are the public health issues? 2012, DEC says to the Department of Health, please do a public health review so we can inform, that can inform our SGEIS that DEC is completing. DOH starts a health review. Commissioner Shaw leaves. Commissioner Zucker comes in and has been completing the health review. The health review will be presented to DEC, and it will inform DEC's preparation of the SGEIS. And just to keep it very simple, I've asked that to be done in public. I heard about it last night, but I would ask Dr. Zucker, who has done a fantastic job, and his team, remember he got in the game a little late on this one, to go through his findings as he's researched this area. He will then provide DEC with his findings, which he's already done, I believe, and then DEC will take the appropriate action. My 2 cents on the whole matter is I will defer to these gentlemen, because these are technical areas and the expertise is required. With that, let me turn it over to, who goes first?
Commissioner Martin.
Commissioner Martens.
Thank you very much, Governor. I'd like you to provide you and the Cabinet with an overview of the Department of Environmental Conservation's extensive review of high-volume hydraulic fracturing. Then, as you mentioned, I'll turn it over to Dr. Zucker, who will provide you with his health report. High-volume hydraulic fracturing, or HVHF, involves a relatively new technology that enables horizontal drilling using large quantities of water and sand to extract natural gas from deep, low permeability shale formations. The environmental review process began in 2008 when DEC initiated a State Environmental Quality Review Act analysis. SEQR requires the preparation of an environmental impact statement for an action that may result in significant adverse impacts. An EIS must analyze the significant environmental and public health impacts and evaluate all reasonable alternatives and mitigation measures that eliminate, avoid, or reduce those impacts. New York, unlike many other states, decided it was prudent to study HVHF and update a generic EIS that DEC had prepared in 1992 before authorizing HVHF in New York. The first draft of the supplemental generic environmental impact statement was released for public review in September 2009 and was followed by 4 public hearings and the submission of more than 13,000 comments. Executive Order 41, issued by Governor Patterson in 2010 and renewed by Governor Cuomo in 2011, created what is commonly referred to as a moratorium. The EO states that permits to drill HVHF wells could not be issued unless under SEQR until the SGIS was completed. Based on extensive public comments, evolving science, and continuing research, in September of 2011, DEC issued a substantially revised draft SGIS that proposed many new restrictions and requirements and substantial additional mitigation measures. DEC held four more public hearings around the state and received another 67,000 comments. DEC designed the first draft SGIS to rely on permit conditions to govern HVHF. Following release of the second draft, DEC also proposed regulations to supplement and reinforce the proposed permit conditions. Once again, we invited public comment and received 180,000 of them. In all, DEC received 260,000 public comments on the SGIS and the regulations. Due to continuing concerns about the effectiveness of the proposed regulations, DEC let them lapse. Unlike other states, DEC worked in tandem with the Department of Health throughout its evaluation of HVHF. However, in light of increasing concerns expressed by public health experts and to formally incorporate a public health review into the SGIS, in September 2012, I called on Dr. Shaw to determine if the mitigation DEC proposed was adequate to protect public health. In the last 2 years, substantial new information regarding HVHF's environmental and public impacts has come to light. As a result, DOH broadened its inquiry. Unlike any other activity regulated by DEC, the potential adverse impacts from HVHF are wide-ranging and widespread, including potential contamination of drinking water supplies, groundwater, lakes, streams, rivers, and other resources, and the ability to properly treat wastewater. Potential impacts to air involve a variety of sources and pollutants, including diesel exhaust from trucks, off-road equipment, and generators, dust and fine particulates, methane, ozone, and volatile organic compounds. Potential significant impacts on land resources include habitat fragmentation and chemical spills, erosion, and contamination from stormwater, disposal of drilling waste, management of flowback and brine, all of which can cause soil contamination. Potential community impacts include increased truck traffic, wear and tear on roads and bridges, increased noise and light pollution, and increased demands on emergency services and healthcare providers, and industrialization of rural landscapes. The challenge of assessing the cumulative impacts made our review even more complex. The costs associated with properly regulating HVHF, repairing and replacing local infrastructure, and providing the necessary local services clearly would be substantial. These costs could easily overwhelm local, county, and state governments and their capacity to deal effectively with the multidimensional natures of HVHF impacts. Over the course of its review, and as a result of evolving science, DEC proposed more and more restrictions in the draft SGEIS in an attempt to mitigate the potential adverse impacts. DEC's expanding list of restrictions were all intended to ensure protection of public health and the environment. To give you an idea of how various proposed restrictions would reduce the availability of Marcellus shale, I'll start with a map of the Marcellus Formation in New York State. It covers roughly 12 million acres, or about 39% of New York's land area. To protect groundwater and drinking water supplies, we started with the premise that drilling could not occur unless the formation was at least 2,000 feet below the ground surface. That eliminated nearly 5 million acres, or 41% of the shale region. Then we proposed bans on drilling in the New York City and Syracuse watersheds, since those two areas rely on unfiltered drinking water, unfiltered surface water. The New York City water supply system, which supplies more than 1.1 billion gallons per day to more than 9.4 million New Yorkers, is the largest unfiltered water supply in the United States. Even with the extensive mitigation measures we proposed in the draft SGIS, significant concerns remained. We also proposed restrictions on drilling in primary and principal aquifers and within 100-year floodplains. The proposed restrictions around water resources would have eliminated or severely restricted HVHF drilling on an additional 1.8 million acres. To protect New York's unparalleled natural and cultural resources, including state parks and the constitutionally protected land within the Catskill Park, DEC determined that it should prohibit drilling within these areas. The state's parklands and other natural areas attract millions of visitors annually and are critical to the upstate tourism economy. Restrictions to mitigate impacts to these areas would have applied to an additional 300,000 acres. In June 2014, there was a legal game changer. New York's highest court confirmed in the Dryden case that towns had legal authority to enact zoning that restricts or prohibits HVHF altogether. Ironically, and as I'll explain later, this clear authority is clouding the future of HVHF in many southern tier communities. Many local governments had already enacted bans and moratoria on HVHF. The Dryden case confirmed their authority to do so. Those communities are depicted in yellow on this map, and those bans and moratoria would have removed an additional 3% of the shale from possible HVHF drilling. This composite map summarizes that 63% of the Marcellus shale would not be available for drilling due to the restrictions proposed or being considered by DEC and prohibitions and moratoria enacted by local governments. Even this composite map does not display all the areas that would have come out of play. At this scale, we could not show, for example, setbacks from a multitude of individual water wells, public water supplies, residences, schools, and other public buildings. Together, DEC's proposed restrictions and local ban and moratoria total approximately 7.5 million acres, or about 63% of the resource. Here's a summary of the various proposed prohibitions and local government restrictions and prohibitions. And the picture even gets cloudier. The practical impact of the Dryden decision that I mentioned earlier is that even more acreage may be off limits to HVHF drilling. Within the 4.5 million acres not excluded by state or local restrictions, approximately 253 towns have zoning and 145 have no zoning. Each town with zoning would have to determine whether its current law restricts or even allows HVHF. Those towns without zoning would still have to decide whether to allow HVHF virtually anywhere or adopt zoning to prescribe where drilling could occur. The uncertainty about whether HVHF is an authorized use would undoubtedly result in additional litigation. It would also result in a patchwork of local land use rules, which industry has claimed would utterly frustrate the rational development of the shale resource. Clearly, the court's decision shifted the battleground to town boards, as evidenced by the conflicting claims of the opposing stakeholder groups. According to the Joint Landowners Coalition, many towns in the southern tier have passed resolutions favoring HVHF, while the online map from fracktracker.org indicates many of the same towns are moving toward a ban. Indeed, our own informal outreach to towns in the southern tier confirms that even towns that support HVHF decisions are still up in the air. I'd say the prospects for HVH development in New York are uncertain at best. Given the wide-ranging potential or increased local regulation of HVHF, the extensive and growing number of restrictions that the state was considering, and the increased cost of mitigation, the economic benefits are clearly far lower than originally forecast. The low price of gas only exacerbates this conclusion. The development and long-term operation of HVHF wells involves unique, unresolved environmental risks ranging from releases, planned and unplanned, to waste disposal to air pollution. HVHF's cumulative impacts only compound the difficulty of assessing these risks. Numerous studies aimed at assessing the environmental impacts of HVHF have identified serious concerns and raised doubt about the protectiveness of certain mitigation measures and the pathways to human exposure. I'd like to now turn the presentation over to Dr. Zucker. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Cuomo, Commissioner Martins, for giving me this opportunity to present my findings and to weigh in on the public health implications of high-volume hydraulic fracturing. When you appointed me as Acting Commissioner of Health 7 months ago, the first thing I looked at was the public health statute, specifically the responsibilities of serving as commissioner. Let me quote from the first part of that statute. Quote, "The commissioner shall take cognizance of the interests of health and life of the people of the state and of all matters pertaining thereto." End quote. These functions are also reflected in our department's mission. My approach to all issues reflects these ideals, so when you and Commissioner Martins asked me to consider the public health implications of HVHF for the residents of New York State, I looked at this process with the same critical eye I always use in medicine. Let me take the next 15 minutes to share with you what I have learned about the public health issues related to HVHF, my recommendation, and how I got there. As Commissioner Martins mentioned, HVHF is a method for shale gas extraction that involves the injection of large volumes of water and sand under high pressure to create fractures in the hydrocarbon-bearing rock. The technique that is currently responsible for the boom in natural gas production has a horizontal component that extends thousands of feet through the gas-containing shale lane. The process involves on-site diesel equipment, truck and manpower, water and chemical mixtures. In fact, some chemicals used aren't even public knowledge, falling under confidential business information. It generates liquid waste, air emissions, noise and light, and changes in the local traffic. With all this in mind, the State Department of Environmental Conservation began developing a supplement to its environmental impact statement to address HVHF and directional drilling. Commissioner Martins requested that my predecessor, and now I, weigh in on the science as it relates to public health. His original request focused on a review of the Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement, the SGEIS, but it became evident during this process that a more comprehensive evaluation of the science was needed. This evaluation needed to assess the potential pathways that connect HVHF activities and environmental impacts to the risk for adverse public health outcomes. These potential pathways that could lead to adverse public health outcomes include water, air, soil, and community. The questions one would want answered are, is my water safe enough to drink and pure enough to drink? Is the air acceptable to breathe? Can I grow vegetables in my garden without facing health consequences? And will my family and community be at unreasonable risk? In addition to the science that must be examined, New York has unique circumstances that the Commissioner mentioned that must be addressed when weighing the health risks, like the potential effects of HVHF on reservoirs that supply drinking water to more than 9 million people in New York City, and on the parklands. With these questions in mind, the department examined all the relevant information available to make an informed assessment. This health review began over 2 years ago and included looking at anecdotal reports, scientific papers, institutional reviews, government documents, industry analyses, and environmental assessments. We reviewed hundreds of documents, thousands of pages, including a sample of which are piled up right behind me here. Of note, it's on double-sided paper, so it's probably twice as high. We consulted the experts in public health and environmental science. We spoke with both proponents and opponents of HVHF. In addition, I have personally spoken with the health commissioners in the majority of states that presently allow HVHF. All told, we estimate that the department spent more than 4,500 hours working on the public health review. You will see in my presentation that existing studies and data illustrate there are many negative potential health effects from HVHF. But more importantly, there are many red flags because scientific issues have not yet been comprehensively studied through rigorous scientific research at this time. So now let's walk through my analytical approach using the information available to reach my conclusion. Water. Most of us take water for granted. We use water for numerous purposes without thinking about it, unless it comes out of the faucet a rusty brown. We assume it's safe, and we should assume it's safe. So when we looked at whether HVHF would impact water, we looked at it from several angles: scientific papers, anecdotal reports. In fact, the science regarding water and HVHF is the most extensively studied. Let's begin with the scientific papers, specifically peer-reviewed studies, including those released within the last 12 months. A groundwater study conducted by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Wyoming found methane was captured in greater levels than one would have expected. This was highly suggestive of a correlation between the water contamination and HVHF. We also reviewed groundwater studies from earlier this fall, by researchers from Duke University and the University of Pennsylvania, University of Rochester. What did they show? Clusters of contaminated groundwater attributed to a gas leakage from wells. The evidence from the studies we reviewed raised public health concerns. Now, air. Most of us don't spend time thinking about the air we breathe, but evidence clearly exists that air pollution has negative health consequences. Can HVHF activities contribute to harmful air pollution? Overall studies show adverse health risks, but in this case, the data is inconsistent. A study by the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, a highly respected federal agency, assessed the risk to workers exposed to chemicals at a natural gas drilling site. At 11 sites, worker levels of silica and diesel particulates, these are carcinogenic compounds, were measured at exceedingly high levels. 68.5% were above the NIOSH recommended exposure limits for silica dust. This finding raises international medical concern as well, as noted in an editorial in the British medical journal, The Lancet. Additionally, a 2014 study that looked at air samples collected in 5 states found elevated levels of 8 different chemicals. This study had weaknesses. There was a lack of upwind air samples. And although the study had some potential, the issue is an important one and it merits further study. What's this study here? But a Colorado Health Department study that was inconclusive in identifying the relationship between oil and gas operations and the risk for adverse health outcomes was also looked at, as well as a Texas Health Department study that looked at the chemicals in the blood of those in proximity to HVHF. They did not find anything unusual, but this latter study had only 28 people involved. And of note, that's a very small sample pool when you're doing a scientific study of this particular nature. Now we turn to community. As part of our review, we also looked at the potential impacts on communities. Just this past September, a Yale survey published in the Environmental Health Perspectives, and that's a highly respected journal in this particular area of science, they found evidence that living close to gas wells may be related to certain health symptoms. We also reviewed another long-term study. This was a limited study in 2014 from Colorado that looked at 125,000 births over a 13-year period, and they found higher rates of heart and nervous system defects in babies born to mothers who live near gas wells. And although not conclusive, it emphasizes the need for further study. That's the study here. In addition, scientific data from as recently as 2013 and 2014 appear to back up claims of increased traffic, noise, odors, the boom-bust impacts associated with HVHF. In fact, a study just published by researchers at Geisinger, copyright 2015, showed increased rates of traffic fatalities and major injuries in 2012 in areas of Pennsylvania where the drilling was occurring. But as much as existing studies have found there are significant health risks if HVHF were to proceed, there are many red flags because there are questions that remain unanswered from lack of scientific analysis, specifically longitudinal studies of HVHF. In the scientific community, longitudinal studies are the gold standard. They are the most reliable data research that we can have. Longitudinal studies would be able to identify connections between HVHF activities and the risk for adverse health outcomes. But there are no longitudinal studies to help inform us in this decision-making process. However, as I mentioned, these studies examining the potential effects of fracking on water, there are no scientific longitudinal studies that provide an authoritative health picture. In addition to the studies I've mentioned regarding the impacts of HVHF on air, there are anecdotal reports of people who have complained of eye, nose, and throat problems, irritation, sneezing, runny nose, and for that matter, even shortness of breath, which could be related to air pollution. But there are few long-term bona fide health studies on air quality, especially given the mixed data on the issue. Likewise, we may not think about our soil as a health issue until our teenager plays on a local soccer field or a softball field, or a toddler tries to dig a hole to China and decides he'll or she will taste the dirt and see what it tastes like. But now, this is fascinating. There are no relevant studies looking at soil contamination and human health effects. And yet we grow our fruits and vegetables in that soil. Our cows graze on the grass in that soil, and way closer to our home, our children play there as well. In essence, bona fide scientific literature is only now emerging. Almost all the studies have occurred within the last 2 years. We also reviewed health impact assessments conducted by other governmental and research institutes that have done studies. They all reiterate that significant gaps exist in the knowledge of potential public health impacts from HVHF and of the effectiveness of some mitigation measures. So what do we have on the horizon? We have a Geisinger study that will evaluate health outcomes of patients within their health system, but the results won't be available for several years. We have a National Science Foundation investigation that will look at conflicts between natural gas and water and air, but this is expected to take at least 3 years to be completed. We have an EPA study, but that only looks at water. And we have a Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection assessment, which is looking at radioactivity. That's what we have on the horizon. But valuable longitudinal studies on other health issues featuring the work of multi-center collaborators inform our decisions. That's how we do this. And we treasure and trust the work of unbiased institutions such as the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, the World Health Organization, the Institute of Medicine, to provide assessments. Unfortunately, a Framingham study does not exist in this case. And in the world of science, the gold standard is a Framingham study. And by that, I'm referring to the very thorough prospective longitudinal study on heart disease that has been cited for decades in the literature. I am not alone in this assessment that we lack the necessary data. In an opinion piece, the British Medical Journal, BMJ, which is the equivalent of our New England Journal of Medicine, came to the same conclusion. They said many uncertainties remain, and given that evidence from well-designed studies form the backbone of public policy, rigorous quantitative epidemiological research is still needed. Like many health issues, HVHF is complex. You've heard about preliminary data, scientific papers, long-term studies, and anecdotes. You've also heard about the lack of authoritative scientific longitudinal studies that scientists use to make informed decisions. I can continue to go on through what we've learned, but the bottom line is that we lack the comprehensive long-term studies, longitudinal studies in particular, and these are either not yet completed or they've yet to even be initiated. We don't have definitive evidence to prove or disprove the claims of health effects. The science isn't there. But the cumulative concerns based on the information I've read, a mere fraction of which I've cited this morning, gives me reason to pause. And to round out these other sources of information, I reached out to my colleagues in most of the states where HVHF is taking place. I learned from many commissioners that their health departments weren't at the table when the decision was being made. We are fortunate that here in New York, the health department was brought into the process at the beginning. The DOH has had the benefit of examining this issue ahead of time. So now what? Now what? Prevention is the cornerstone of public health. It is at the foundation of all that we do. The words of former Health Commissioner Dr. David Axelrod still echo in the halls of the department today. He said we must exercise a sense of concern for future generations. Once damage is done, it is often extremely difficult to fix it, and we have a responsibility, not only to ourselves, but as Dr. Axelrod said, to future generations. I can't go to the future to know what will happen, but as often said by historians, one needs to learn from the past to deduce what could happen in years to come. However, we now have an unusual opportunity to look at this important health issue in advance of proceeding with HVHF activities in New York. Take, for example, one issue, the issue of secondhand smoke. As a child, I recall being in the non-smoking section on a plane, and just 2 rows away, passengers were lighting up. I recall my parents saying, "They call this the no smoking section? Clearly, we can still smell the smoke." Years later, studies elaborating the dangers of secondhand smoke were published, leading to the Surgeon General's report in 1986, followed by a more recent report in 2006. What once was viewed as harmless was proven through prospective longitudinal studies to increase the risk of cancer in adults and ADHD in children. Today, it's taken for granted that you can't smoke on an airplane, and for that matter, in most public places. Governor, you asked me for my opinion and said, "Let the science decide." So in conclusion, I draw from my career as a doctor, where tough decisions were asked of me quite frequently. How did I decide whether to send a 2-year-old patient of mine for heart surgery when the decision was complex? When there wasn't conclusive medical data, I said to myself, what would I do if this were my 2-year-old? And then, Governor, in some strange way, the answer became easier. I feel the same here. Would I live in a community with HVHF based on the facts I have now? Would I let my child play in the school field nearby? Or my family drink the water from the tap, or grow their vegetables in the soil? After looking at the plethora of reports, as you see behind me, and others that I have in my office, my answer is no. I try to do everything possible to look out for the health and welfare of New Yorkers, just as I have been charged to do by our statute. I've heard it said that a successful innovation is one that not only raises productivity and living standards, but one that allows us to live longer, healthier lives. Would hydrofracking do that? As the acting health commissioner, I consider the people of the state of New York as my patients. We cannot afford to make a mistake. The potential risks are too great. In fact, they are not even fully known. Relying upon the limited data that is presently available to answer the public health risks would be negligent on my part. I have identified significant public health risks in the current data, and until the public health red flags are answered by valid evidence through longitudinal long-term studies, prospective analysis, patient surveys with large population pools showing that the risk for impact on public health are avoidable or sufficiently low, I cannot support high-volume hydraulic fracturing in the great state of New York. I would like to thank you, Governor Cuomo and Commissioner Martins, for the opportunity to provide my input, and I would also like to thank my entire team who worked tirelessly on this effort for the past many years. And I now turn the presentation back over to Commissioner Martins.
Thank you, Dr. Zucker. Well, as you just heard, Dr. Zucker has concluded that HVHF should not proceed in New York State because of significant health risks found in the studies he reviewed and due to the absence of bona fide research that would provide sufficient information to determine the level of risk to public health and whether those risks could be adequately managed. DEC's own review identified dozens of potential significant adverse impacts of HVHF, including cumulative impacts, significant information gaps on the scope and severity of the impacts, and a lack of proof that the proposed mitigation measures are sufficiently protective. Further, the exclusion of sensitive natural, cultural, and historic resources and the increasing number of towns that could enact bans and moratoria have substantially reduced the potential economic benefit from HVHF. Considering the research, the public comments, relevant studies, Dr. Zucker's report, and the enormous record DEC has amassed on this issue, I have directed my staff to complete the seeker process early next year by publishing a final SGEIS. I will then issue a legally binding finding statement prohibiting HVHF in New York State at this time. Thank you, Governor and Cabinet members.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zucker, and thank you, Commissioner Martins. Let's talk about this a little bit. First, I think, Dr. Zucker, your presentation was especially effective. The takeaway that I get is from the data, there are questions that are raised that you consider serious questions about public health, and there is no research that would deny those questions that are raised. I'll tell you the truth, what I found most powerful in your presentation is when you said that you wouldn't let your family live in an area with high volume fracturing, because you're right. You know, sometimes things can be very complicated or they can be very simple. I thought that was very powerful and poignant when you said you wouldn't let your children live there. And if you don't believe your children should live there, then I agree, your duty is to suggest that no child lives there. Joe, can you go back, please, Commissioner Martens, to the slide about the 37%? I just want to understand what's the affected area winds up being. That was very interesting to me that, you know, we talk about the Marcellus Shale area. It starts very wide, but then you reduce it by other factors. And at the end of the day, what is the universe of affected property? And you raise a good point. You don't even know what towns would be in or out because you don't know what towns, after the Dryden decision, you don't know what towns would allow it. Did you try in any way, was there any way to find out what towns would allow it if it went forward?
Governor, we reached out informally to quite a few of the supervisors across the southern tier. And basically, what we heard back confirmed that there is lots of towns that intend to move forward with HBHF, but many were undecided. Many didn't know what steps they'd have to take next because of the Dryden decision. Zoning ordinances, as they're written now, are not clear whether they could go forward or not. So lots of towns are reviewing those now, and I think the takeaway from the slide is that the two sides of the debate are going to battle this now out in front of town boards. Every time a zoning ordinance is opened up, the opponents are clearly going to weigh in, the proponents will weigh in, but it's really become a very severe local issue.
The green is green and white.
The green is towns with zoning, the white is towns that don't have any zoning. And of course the question there is that in the towns with no zoning, it's basically a free-for-all. They don't have any restrictions in place, and I think many of those towns, again from our phone calls, are considering zoning because they don't want to let drilling occur just anywhere. So they're going to have to enact zoning ordinances, which doesn't happen overnight. So it creates a very confusing picture for the resource that's left, the 37% that's left as an available resource.
Do you have a guesstimate of what it will wind up at the end of the day after the zoning fights, et cetera?
All I can say, Governor, is that it's going to be considerably less than 37%. I think there's no way to predict what's going to happen in every one of these towns, and it would take a fair amount of time just to play out.
I'll tell you, I spent quite a bit of time in that area, as you can imagine. I get very few people who say to me, I love the idea of fracking. Basically, they say, I have no alternative because there is no other economy for me besides fracking. And that's where I think we should turn. What economy and what can we do in these areas to generate jobs, generate wealth for people who can't pay their mortgage and can't pay their taxes as an alternative to fracking? Anyway, well done, gentlemen. Questions, comments?
Joe, given the map and the way it's laid out, would there even be any significant economic development even if you went forward?
I think what we can conclude, Bob, is that it would be significantly less than originally forecast. And it is, Even the industry has questioned whether or not it would be economical, given all of the resource taken out of play. The restrictions that DEC has been proposing and the increasing over time have all been proposed to address environmental concerns. So there's issues of the cost of compliance, the amount of the resource that's taken out, just because the drilling shouldn't occur in places that are proximate to state parks that are where the resource is too shallow. So the resource keeps shrinking. The price of gas is $4 a million cubic feet, which is at historic lows. So it is very unlikely in the near future it would go forward anyways, just because of the economic conditions that exist now. But long term, again, it's highly questionable whether it would be profitable in New York State.
Any other questions? This is self-executing between you two gentlemen. I have nothing to do with it. I love it when that happens, by the way. It doesn't happen enough as far as I'm concerned. Any other questions? Okay, let's take questions from the press.
Governor, I'm just curious about the timing on this. On the one hand, it comes out today, and there's some disappointment in the southern tier, perhaps for those who are hoping for an economic boom, but it comes out at the same day that casinos are being announced. I'm just curious about that. It's almost like a message that we haven't forgotten about the upstate economy. Was there any coordination there on messaging?
For your conspiracy theory to be right, which it may be, you would need this area to win a casino, right? The two happen to be coincidental, as you know, because we've been talking about both forever. We've been talking about the fracking study forever. We've been talking about the fracking study before anyone ever mentioned the word casino, Zach. So it's impossible that there was a correlation. I did want the decisions out at the end of the year, and I want to start the new year with these decisions made and behind us, and we move forward.
Governor, just for, I know you said it previously, but you then will support this. Fracking is dead.
I don't think I even have a role here, Ken. I think this is the Commissioner of DEC completes an SEGIS? SGEIS. He had asked the Department of Health for an opinion. He's incorporating that opinion in his finding.
The supporters of fracking are certainly going to say it's been done in 30 states, however many states, and that there has not been a major environmental problem. How do we, as New York, defend that then, the questions that you're raising?
The fact is that many of the states out there never brought the health team to the table, and also there isn't enough data out there. There isn't enough data, as I mentioned in the presentation, and the data that's out there is disturbing.
Ken, the other thing that I would say with regards to New York is New York it's a very water-rich state. I mentioned the New York City watershed, the largest unfiltered water supply in the country. Syracuse also has an unfiltered water supply. The map showed primary and principal aquifers scattered all over the southern tier. We are an extremely water-rich state. We have state parks, other resources, and we've always been a state that's been very protective of our natural resources. That's not to say that we didn't look long and hard, because obviously we did, at whether or not we could provide enough mitigation to protect those resources. I think in the final analysis, we couldn't conclude that there were not significant public health risks. Certainly the studies that Dr. Zucker mentioned made a connection between the activity and public health. The studies were not as complete as we would like. Dr. Zucker indicated we'd like more long-term studies to make sure that there is actually a connection between the two, but certainly there's a lot of evidence on the table that suggests it couldn't be done safely.
So just to follow up, your views on this have evolved then because of these
Yes.
studies? Would the commissioner really support it moving forward?
I said way back at the beginning that with all the proper mitigations in place, that it could be done, that I thought it could be done safely. This is where it's beneficial to take a long-term view and watch what's been going on around the country, and that's exactly what we've done.
You were not asked or basically led to a direction of where this study should wind up?
No, in fact, after a lot of significant and serious public health concerns were raised by public health professionals, I turned to the Department of Health because I'm not a doctor.
Is there any kind of mechanism for reconsideration as more reports come out? And for Dr. Zucker, isn't this essentially implying that the other states that currently allow fracking have gotten it wrong?
With regards to your first question, this is my opinion at this point. Obviously, in the future, I'm going to look at data that comes in, but there's no, at this point, the answer is no. And regarding the other states, I was here to look at what's best for New York.
I'm sorry, if I'm not mistaken, seeker requires a new comment period if there are significant changes from a draft to a final version of the SGEIS. Are you reopening this to public comment? And can you take me through the steps that would have to happen for the SGEIS to be finalized?
We have to complete the document, complete response to comments, and also obviously incorporate the new information from the Department of Health. We'll put out a final SGIS, hopefully early next year, and then we, after 10 days after the final SGIS is out, we issue a finding statement.
Does it have to be reopened to public comment?
No.
It does not.
Governor, you now release all of these documents to show, let the public know what was considered, what was said, all of this before, and if you are going to release it, at what time would you make it public?
You know, I'll leave it to these two gentlemen. There's going to be a ton of lawsuits, I'm sure, every which way from Sunday now. So as consistent with whatever they have to do legally, I would encourage it.
Well, Governor, to that issue, do you feel like the state is on firm legal ground here when it comes to the likely lawsuits resulting from this?
You know, Nick, as I said, this is an emotional debate, and I think this is a very factual presentation and persuasive on the facts. Do I believe the facts will trump all emotion? No. So I'm sure the people who disagree with this will continue to disagree with it.
Governor, given the serious health concerns that your staff is describing, do you think the state should move to ban importing gas into New York, whether it's for use by residents or as transshipment point? I guess there's a lot of proposals to bring a lot of frack gas into New York.
Yeah, I think the concerns are more about how the fracking itself, how it's taken out of the ground. And that's a state-by-state decision, as we've seen. And I'm not going to question another state's decision. If they think it makes sense for them in their context, in that situation, with their precautions, then that's up to them.
Governor, regarding taking gas out of the ground, there are something like 14,000 wells in New York State. A lot of them are natural gas wells. A lot of them have been fracked. They're not high volume. They're more shallow. They're closer to the water table. Do you think those wells should be shut down?
Bill, I don't know. I don't, it's not my area. I'm not an expert in the engineering. I don't know if Joe has.
No, I think it's like comparing apples and oranges. Shallow fracked wells don't use nearly the volume of water, don't generate nearly the volume of waste. It's a completely different game. We've been regulating that activity in New York, as you know, for years, and it's been done safely in New York. But the reason we started this process was because high volume hydraulic fracturing and the horizontal legs of those fractures are thousands of feet long, and again, the enormous volumes of water and waste that are generated make it a completely separate activity.
The health report's been in the works for 2 years, 2+ years at this point. Do you have an actual report that you will be making public, giving to Commissioner Martens? Or?
We have a report that will be on the website.
Okay, so it's like an actual
Yes.
document.
Yes.
And there's been questions throughout the entire process dating back to the beginning about the transparency of the report. And there was never a scoping document, and there was never much public discussion about what actually is entailed in the report. Do you feel like your department's been sufficiently transparent?
The department has been transparent. This is a science review. So when you're doing science, you need to review the literature that's out there. And it has been transparent now. We'll provide you with the report, and you'll see all the information there.
But along the way, I mean, there were certainly stakeholders who wanted to weigh in on what you were looking at and the formal scope? I mean,
The stakeholders on both sides came in, and their views were presented to my team.
Also, John, excuse me one second. You know, John, we've been through this conversation enough times in this room. When you have a side that disagrees passionately with an outcome, they question the process. Always. The side that that winds up happy praises the process. The side that winds up unhappy condemns the process. And they always find something to condemn. But this has been, as you said, the inverse is also true. The most exhaustive, we didn't rush anything. We took our time. They talked to everyone. We had advisory boards. They traveled. They read everything. You know, at one point, you disagree. And I understand there's plenty of reason to disagree. But it's too easy and too cheap to just always question the process when you don't agree with the outcome, right?
This report is coming out a month after your re-election bid. You've discussed about the power of the anti-frackers, or at least the stamina, I guess, of the anti-frackers. I mean, did politics in any way influence this conclusion?
Well, good thing it came out after the election, right? Otherwise, that question would have touched more of a conspiratorial bone, right?
Well, it certainly would have.
It's after the election.
It would have angered business groups had you put this out before the election.
Well, if I put it out before the election, you would have asked that question.
Ask what? The question that I just asked.
Was it political? Because it was just before an election. Now it's after the election. So it can't be political, it's after the election.
Governor, some would say that it came out a month afterwards, so you didn't have to deal with it before the election.
Oh, reverse politics. So it can't come out.
No, Governor, that makes more sense because you didn't have to defend the decision while you're running for
All right,
election.
but Mike, it can't come out before the election. It can't come out after the election. Both are going to be political.
You're the only one saying it can't come out until after the election.
Well, if it comes out, no, John's question is, it came out after the election, must be political. Your question is, if it came out before the election, it would have been political.
I don't think John said that, and my question is, when were the decisions made? When was it clear for the health commissioner? When was it clear that there wouldn't be?
I said by the end of the year, and they were ready now.
And now meaning yesterday when they told you, or days ago?
I'm sure, well, they're ready today to make a public presentation, but you have to back up from a public presentation. They had to finish a report, they had to do a slideshow, they had to write it up.
Right, and Health Commissioner, when was it clear to you what your decision would be, or that there wasn't enough information to support fracking?
This has been an ongoing process since I came into the position 7 months ago. My intent was to get this completed by the end of the calendar year from the day I started this job.
And when was it clear to you that this would be the result?
Over the course of the last couple of weeks, I mean, I've been putting this together, but I would say that it's an evolving process.
Over the course of the last couple of weeks?
Well, I have put it together, but it's been an evolving process.
Mr. Governor, you've been unwilling to say on the record if you believe that climate change is caused by humans. And I'm wondering if this decision today is part of an evolving belief on your behalf. You talked extensively about the changing new normal and the storms we've experienced, which basically virtually every climate scientist is a result of human-caused global warming. Do you agree with those science? Do you think that humans are causing global warming?
I believe two things. First, as a matter of context, what I fundamentally deal with is extreme weather. And what the people around this table deal with is extreme weather, right? And I want to keep the focus on the extreme weather because that is inarguable, it's non-political. You see from your colleagues how fast they are to go to the politics and the substance becomes dwarfed. So whenever I can, I tend to stay away from the politics and deal with the substance. We deal with extreme weather. We're putting in a new weather system to have a better, more data on weather. Trucks, National Guard, we deal with extreme weather. I try to stay away from politically charged discussion. Well, do you think extreme weather is a function of climate change? And what causes climate change? Because now you're off to the political races. Yeah, my political opinion, not being an expert in the field, and I'm very big on know what you don't know, and if you don't know, don't dabble. From everything I have heard as a lawyer, not as an expert in the field, I believe human activity is a factor in climate change. What percent, what degree, what significance, I don't know, but I believe it's a factor.
Governor, you
had said that the anti-fracking activists made their case better, that you said that the oil industry, the gas industry didn't step up enough. Did that have any impact on this case?
No, because the commissioner wouldn't have known any of that. He's only been here 7 months.
He lives in the political world as well as
And not the world where they were active. I live in the world where they were more visible. And in terms of protests, in terms of lobbyists, in terms of legislators being influenced, the commissioner did it based on the information.
Governor, there's no protesters in the Capitol today, and there's not the usual state police presence, because I didn't see it when I was walking in here. Did anyone give these guys a heads up that this was the decision that's going to be made today? Do you normally come to all these events?
Yeah, I do not know.
Governor, on another topic.
If they're not here, my guess would be no, but you know.
Governor, what's your reaction to the teacher evaluation data that came out yesterday, particularly the first results for the New York City Department of Education? And how does that information inform whatever changes you might like to see to the system in the upcoming legislative session?
I think it affirms the premise that you have to do a better job on designing a teacher evaluation mechanism. I believe it is incredible to believe that is an accurate reflection of the state of education in New York.
How might you address what apparently you see as the scores being artificially high?
I think we have to go back to work on that teacher evaluation process, which, by the way, is going to be an evolving, we said from day one, it is going to be an evolving process, right? Teacher evaluations, first politically, they didn't want to do them in the first place. They were supposed to do the teacher evaluations before I ever became governor as a condition of the race to the top money from the federal government. They didn't do it. They procrastinated. The state legislature didn't want to force the teachers' union to do it. I believe that was politically motivated by the legislature. I came in, I said, we have to do it. The first iteration gave a disproportionate amount of power to the union. We made some improvements. We had a second version. We made some improvements. We have a third version. The version that was done for New York City was actually done by John King at SED. I don't know if you remember how it happened. The only way we got the teacher evaluations done finally was we made it a condition of funding. We said if a school district does not have a teacher evaluation complete, they won't get the 5% additional state funding. New York City still didn't have it done. Our resolution was John King from SED would go down and actually negotiate the teacher evaluation and design it. This is SED's designed evaluation, where something like less than about 1% were actually deemed ineffective, or whatever the lowest ranking was. So I think everybody knows it doesn't reflect reality, and we have to go back to the table and come up with a system that is fair to the teachers, accurate, objective, but realistic. Right? You can do both. People get evaluated. In work, they get evaluated. You get evaluated. I get evaluated. People get evaluated. You can evaluate people. And it doesn't mean you don't love them and that you don't value what they do. It means you want an evaluation. I would say reward the high performers and get the low performers the help they need. But these results and these evaluations say one thing. It's not real. It's not real. You have an evaluation system in name. And you have to go back to the table and try to come up with an evaluation system that's more accurate. The teachers' union is trying to reduce the number that are deemed ineffective, right? And that's what this evaluation system did. But it's clear an inaccurate evaluation system helps no one, not even the teachers.
Governor, could you explain the reasoning behind the administration's decision to push to move about 1,000 PEF represented employees to MC status? And on a related question, today's the deadline for you to take action on the MC pay bill. I was wondering if you could say where you're going to come down on that.
I have no idea on either of those questions. However, since I'm surrounded by smart people, I'm sure someone knows what you're talking about. Who knows?
Those titles, Casey, that you asked about, they don't belong in the Public Employee Federation Union. They're decision-making titles. They belong in the management confidential category.
Governor, how are you going to make the argument your problem in the election was with the left, who are probably the strongest anti-frackers, out there. People who support fracking are certainly going to say this was your way of trying to mend your relationship with the left. Why should people not believe that?
Yeah, we're not going to do this again. Who's the left? Who? Where does he live? What is his station, the left? No, that's I'm the left. Okay, Larry's Mr. Left. He's in charge of the left. And Jim is in charge of the left. And Drew's in charge of the right. If you look at what liberals think in this state, we know what a left is. Left are liberals. You take a poll. People call themselves liberals. They're Democrats. They call themselves liberals. And they are the highest, I have my highest approval with that group. Okay? So when you state problems with the left, that is just an inaccurate statement, right? Factually inaccurate. All right, well, that's different. Then say that.
I'll say that. But how do you convince people that this wasn't?
I don't consider it a highly relevant factor to anything.
Governor, the danger of this going down the same avenue. You spoke earlier of trying to get lawmakers to pass ethics legislation, campaign finance, public financing, and even having a pay raise as a carrot to dangle over them, and they're still not going for it. Do you believe at this point now that at this leverage point you can't get them to do ethics legislation even further down the road? Or are you declaring defeat on that front at all?
Well, let's start the year with a little political candor and reality, right? And analysis and frankness. I passed 2 or 3 ethics bills. Every time I passed a bill, I was criticized for not getting public finance and not getting campaign finance reform. By you also, and many of your compatriots. In my campaign finance bill that spurred the creation of the Moreland Commission, I had public finance and campaign finance. In my proposed ethics bill that would end the Moreland, I had public finance and campaign finance. I said I couldn't get it. I closed the Moreland, but I got a lot of other good things: independent enforcement at the Board of Elections, more disclosure, felonies, etc. And the criticism was, well, you should have held out for public finance and campaign finance. And you should have said, I'm not closing the Moreland until I get public finance or campaign finance, and you would have gotten it from them. Because you're a good negotiator, so you would have gotten it from them. And then we had this back and forth for 6 months where I said they would not do it. They would not do it, like they wouldn't do it the preceding 3 times. And that was the debate, right? And then I was crucified for not getting public finance and campaign finance reform when I should have been able to do it. Your point is now right. However, it's the exact opposite of what you said last year. What do they want more than anything? Pay raise. Why? Because they deserve, they need it. It is personal to them. Many of them live in high-cost areas, and they really need the pay raise. So probably the single item they want most, and have wanted most in 4 years, I said, okay, I'll give you what you want most. Pass public finance reform? No. How about a referendum on public finance reform? No. How about campaign finance reform? No. How about prohibitions on where the income comes from and income limits and more disclosure, and we clean up housekeeping and personal use, etc.? No. Okay. Now, what I could do is get whatever I can get and give them a pay raise, right? Because there are other things I could get. But then the argument would be the same argument you made last year. You shouldn't have given it to them without a pay raise.
So, Governor, you said earlier, and you think those issues are completely off the table as the legislature has been figured out?
I think this is the moment where, in some ways, the greatest incentive for them to do it was now. And with the greatest incentive, they will not do it.
Governor, just before Ken asks his last question, I'm sure somebody was about to leap forward to answer my question on the MC pay bill. You've got about 11 hours to act on it.
Oh, did you not answer that MC pay bill question?
No, I did not answer that question. Stay tuned.
Governor, you said earlier, and you were correct.
I don't know what it is, Casey. I'm going to learn about it in the next 11 hours.
You created a commission to determine pay increases for MC employees. You vetoed it last year, saying it should have been dealt with in the budget process. The budget director sent a letter to the OMC, the MC's organization, a couple of weeks ago, saying we hear what you're saying.
A commission instead of just doing it as part of the contract?
It would be an ongoing commission that would recommend raises for MCs outside of the process.
Just MCs, not everybody else?
Yes.
Why would you do that?
Good answer.
I'm saying, enlighten me. Do you have a good reason to do that?
I think I'm going to let OMC make that.
Yeah, okay.
That's what I believe they have made it to.
All right.
Were you going to say something?
No.
All right. You said earlier that proponents of fracking often say, if not this, then what? And those proponents, so a lot of them are in Binghamton and Elmira, areas that have lagged in job growth in recent years. So I'll toss that question back at you. If not fracking, then what?
That is a legitimate question. And that's what I mentioned to my colleagues here, and that's a challenge for us. Because I believe, I'll take it a step further, John. I've never had anyone say to me, I believe fracking is great. Not a single person in those communities. What I get is, I have no alternative but fracking, and if you say no to fracking, then I have no alternative. And I own a farm, and I have to pay a mortgage, and I have to pay these incredible property taxes, and there's no economic opportunity. And they tend to be landowners who are long-term landowners in the community, and in the emotional back and forth, they think the opponents of fracking are the second home people and the visitors who just don't want a disruption of the landscape. And their point is they need jobs and they need income. And what's the alternative to fracking? And I think that is a very good question, and I think it's our responsibility to develop an alternative for that community for safe, clean economic development. That community is one of the slowest economies in the state. And if you look at what we've done, Western New York, which was one of the slowest economies for decades. There's been significant progress. North Country, which was one of the slowest economies for decades, there's been tremendous progress over the past 4 years. And the point on the southern tier is, and where's economic progress for us?
So to which governor, do you believe that casinos would be acceptable economic development in that area?
I don't think casinos are the answer there, Jimmy. It's, you know, casinos are, first, you're right on the Pennsylvania border. You have high competition with Pennsylvania to begin with. And a casino can stimulate a region, but I don't think that is an economic development answer there.
Governor, Port Authority legislation has now been sent to your desk. I think you have until the 27th and 28th to sign it. Do you plan on doing so?
Which legislation is that? Do you know, Pat?
Governor, the FOIA legislation and the governance, two separate bills that I believe have been sent to your desk.
I've not looked at it yet. I've not gone through it, Zach.
Governor, do you plan to sign the safety net bill for the teacher evaluations that you negotiated with NASDAQ?
Can you repeat the question?
Do you plan to sign the safety net bill as your program bill that you negotiated in this session with NICET and then advanced with the message of necessity?
I just enjoy how you shut up Ken Lovett, to tell you the truth. I'll be baked. I think the evaluation system is going to be, by this data that you pointed to, I think if it says anything, we have to reevaluate the evaluation system, so to speak.
So you're not going to sign it?
I think we should reevaluate the evaluation system in light of this data, and I don't know that those changes would make a significant difference to this data.
There's also a bill that's coming your way by the end of the year that would take the disciplining of police officers in New York City away from the commissioner. Is that something you plan to veto or sign?
I don't have an opinion on that, Ken. We haven't done it. In the back? Have we exhausted all reasonable questions? How about unreasonable questions, Eric Orden? Okay, guys, thank you very much.